We will now introduce today's witnesses. Dr. Rochelle Walensky is the Director of the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention and the Administrator of the Agency for Toxic Substances and Disease Registry. Dr. Anthony Fauci is the Director of the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases and the Chief Medical Advisor on President Biden's COVID-19 response team. Dr. Janet Woodcock is the Acting Commissioner of the Food and Drug Administration. Don O'Connell is the Assistant Secretary for Preparedness and Response. And Director Walensky, Director Fauci, Acting Commissioner Woodcock, and Assistant Secretary O'Connell. I want to thank you all for joining us today. We all look forward to your testimony, and we will begin with Dr. Walensky on your opening statement.
Good morning. Chair Murray, Ranking Member Burr, members of the Senate Health Committee, I appreciate the opportunity to join you to provide an update on the COVID-19 pandemic and the impact of the Omicron variant. It has been just over 2 years since we were first alerted to the emergence of SARS-CoV-2 in China. And since that time, CDC has worked with our partner agencies and you in Congress to take remarkable action to protect the health and safety of Americans. Omicron is now the dominant variant in the United States, driving case counts to unprecedented heights here in the United States and around the world. Despite the increases in cases, there are promising emerging data from South Africa and the United Kingdom that hospitalization rates for people infected with Omicron are lower compared with prior variants. These data seem consistent with what we're seeing so far in the United States. However, despite a potential decrease in severity, the substantial number of absolute cases is resulting in hospitalization increases across all age groups, including children aged 0 to 4. The emergence of the Omicron variant again emphasizes the importance of vaccinations and boosters, which decrease the risk of infection, severe disease, and death caused by COVID-19. Just last week, we made important progress towards increasing booster coverage through four key actions. First, we expanded eligibility of booster doses to those 12 to 15 years old. Second, CDC strengthens its booster recommendation for adolescents, now recommending that adolescents aged 12 to 17 years old should receive a booster shot 5 months after their initial Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine series. Third, we recommended that moderately or severely immunocompromised 5 to 11-year-olds receive an additional primary dose of vaccine 28 days after their second shot. And fourth, we shortened the recommended time between a primary mRNA series and a booster dose from 6 months to 5 months. Each action increases access to vaccines and booster doses at a time when protection is critical. As we continue to monitor this rapidly evolving virus,
As a gun owner, you need to know how to protect yourself, but it is equally important to know what happens after you protect yourself. Just click Learn More.
Including at home and in public for an additional 5 days. We recommend that you avoid activities where you are unable to wear a mask and that you avoid travel for the full 10 days. In addition, CDC changed the recommended duration of quarantine. Quarantine is what you do after you're exposed. People who are not up to date on recommended COVID-19 vaccines should quarantine for 5 days if they come in contact with someone with COVID-19. People who do not develop symptoms by day 5 should get tested. If you test positive, you should begin isolation. People who test negative may end quarantine and should continue to wear a well-fitting mask when around others for an additional 5 days. These recommendations are consistent with over 100 studies collected over the past 2 years, indicating that people are most infectious during their first few days of infection and significantly less infectious 6 to 10 days after infection. A core part of CDC's mission is to translate science into recommendations for best practices and real-world circumstances. Over the holidays, we saw the growing surge of Omicron and took swift, science-based action to address the very real possibility of staffing shortages in hospitals and in other essential areas of the workforce, including schools, pharmacies, public safety, public labs, grocery stores, and other sites, where shortages could have and have proven to have dire public health consequences. This is the right guidance for what we currently know about transmission and the real-world circumstances we currently face. As we will learn more, we will continue to update accordingly. Omicron is likely not to be the last curveball this virus throws at us, but we have the tools to prevent further spread of this virus. This means for everyone 5 and older, please get vaccinated. For those 12 and older, get the booster shot. And please continue to adhere to the multi-layered prevention measures, including masking and, yes, washing your hands. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you. Dr. Fauci.
Madam Chair, Ranking Member Burr, members of the committee, thank you for giving me the opportunity to discuss with you the role of the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases in the conduct and support of research addressing our nation's response to COVID-19. In our most recent hearing before this committee on November the 4th, I discussed the importance of booster shots to enhance immunity against the Delta variant that wanes over time. Indeed, booster shots have dramatically reconstituted the waning immunity and has increased protection over and above the original level afforded by the primary vaccine regimen. Today, we are faced with a different challenge, a new variant called Omicron that has rapidly spread throughout the world, including a massive, unprecedented surge in the United States. This variant possesses a large number of mutations that are associated with an increased efficiency of transmission, immune evasion from certain monoclonal antibodies, convalescent plasma, and antibodies induced by our current vaccines. Thus far, data from our own laboratories at NIAID, as well as from laboratories throughout the world, have indicated that vaccine-induced antibodies lose a considerable amount of potency in neutralizing the Omicron variant. Although this is of obvious concern, the encouraging news is that a third shot boost of an mRNA vaccine significantly reconstitutes and enhances the ability of antibodies from boosted individuals to neutralize the Omicron variant, strongly suggesting that boosters will play a major role in protecting our population, at least from severe disease, in the context of the ongoing massive surge of the Omicron variant that we are currently experiencing, underscoring why it is so important for the unvaccinated to get vaccinated and for those who are already vaccinated to obtain the booster shot. Therapies in general are an important part of our armamentarium against COVID. In this regard, the NIH has been heavily involved in the development and/or clinical testing of several effective monoclonal antibodies against SARS-CoV-2. However, we have ascertained that certain of the authorized monoclonal antibodies are negatively impacted by the Omicron variant. Direct antiviral therapies also are an extremely important tool in the fight against COVID-19. Importantly, it appears that the mutations expressed by the Omicron variant do not interfere with the oral antiviral drugs Paxlovid and Molnupiravir that NIH-funded investigators played an early role in developing and that have recently received emergency use authorization from the FDA. Nor do they appear to interfere with the FDA fully approved drug remdesivir, shown by NIH-sponsored studies to be highly effective in preventing severe disease. Looking ahead in the context of the inevitable continual emergence of new variants, the importance of developing a pan-coronavirus vaccine, namely one that would be effective against all SARS-CoV-2 variants and ultimately against all coronaviruses, becomes even more apparent. My colleagues and I recently published a paper in the New England Journal of Medicine emphasizing the urgent need for such an effort. In this regard, we have made significant progress in that direction. We have identified antibodies that neutralize multiple different coronaviruses. And in addition, NIAID has issued new awards to fund cane coronavirus vaccines at 4 academic institutions. These awards will fund multidisciplinary collaborative teams to conduct research focused on coronavirus virology and immunology, immunogen design, and innovative vaccine and adjuvant platforms, as well as technologies to discover, design, and develop pan-coronavirus vaccine candidates. Finally, I would like to close by looking forward to how we might best enhance our preparedness for what inevitably will be the emergence of future pandemics. The NIAID will play an important role in the multi-billion-dollar all-of-government plan for pandemic preparedness. Our mission is the rapid development and implementation of successful countermeasures against several prototype pathogen families of viruses that threaten the health and safety not only of our nation, but of the entire world. Thank you for your attention, and I would be happy to answer your questions following the presentations.
Thank you. Dr. Woodcock?
Good morning, Chair Murray, Ranking Member Burr, and members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to testify. FDA's thousands of employees remain steadfast in fighting this pandemic. Our work continued during the holiday season and led to critical advancements in combating the
Holiday
virus.
season.
The agency's
there
been
it goes.
closely monitoring the
There goes the
potential
chat
impact
box.
of the Omicron variant on the
showed
currently
up on the
available
TV.
vaccines, diagnostics, and therapeutics.
That just
I'll
showed up.
provide a brief update
Yep,
on
up here.
actions the agency has taken in these 3 areas since I last testified before this committee.
Yeah, I am on
First,
YouTube.
regarding
I'm streaming.
vaccines. The currently authorized and approved vaccines remain highly
gotta drink your
effective at
tea.
preventing serious outcomes associated with COVID-19.
Everybody got double mask on
including
those bitch.
hospitalization
Look at
and
this.
death.
Retards.
Additionally, data evaluated by the FDA suggests that an additional booster shot following the completion of primary vaccination provides further protection against these outcomes. Following these data, FDA updated the Pfizer, BioNTech, and Moderna vaccine EUAs to shorten the time between completion of a primary series and a booster dose to at least 5 months rather than 6 months. FDA also updated the Pfizer BioNTech EUA, so it's now available for a primary series in children ages 5 and older, and for the use of a booster dose in all individuals 12 through 15 years of age after completion of primary vaccination, as you've already heard from Dr. Walensky, as the CDC followed up on this. The agency also authorized the Pfizer vaccine for a 3rd primary series dose for certain immunocompromised children that are 5 through 11.
I just want to hear some good
These
questions.
vaccines have met FDA's rigorous standards, and the bottom line is getting vaccinated or receiving a booster with one of the currently available vaccines is the best thing the public can do right now to protect themselves and those they care about. It is not too late to get vaccinated or get boosted. Second, diagnostic tests, which are another key line of defense in this pandemic. Increasing access to accurate, rapid, at-home tests continues to be a priority for FDA. Since I last testified, the agency's authorized 4 additional over-the-counter at-home tests, bringing the total number to 15. And the agency continues to prioritize the review of these type of tests. We also partnered with the NIH to establish ICAP, which streamlines validation and authorization of antigen tests with potential for large-scale manufacturing. We expect shorter review times for such EUA requests due to our partnership with ICAP. In fact, the first 2 tests that participated in this program were authorized in 2 days or less from the time FDA received the final data.
Supply side
So this is a
conditions.
very good
And that's why I
model for
mentioned it's-
government
this really is
assistance
a problem
of
both
diagnostic
very strong
manufacturers.
elevated demand,
In this new
particularly
program,
on
ICAP
the
will
part of the
prioritize
economy
new
that-
over-the-counter test submissions that could be manufactured at significant scale to accelerate the availability of high-quality, accurate, and reliable tests for the public as quickly as possible. Third, as new variants continue to emerge, it's crucial to expand the country's arsenals of COVID-19 therapeutics,
fucking
especially
hot
for
in
those
here.
unable to get vaccinated or who can't respond to vaccination. Since I last testified, 3 therapeutics have been authorized for use in the treatment of COVID-19 for emergency use. The first of these EUAs, EvuShield, was authorized for the prevention of COVID-19. The other 2 therapies, Paxlovid and Molnupiravir, as you heard from Dr. Fauci, are the first authorized treatments for COVID-19 in the form of a pill that can be taken orally, which is a major step in the fight against this global pandemic. These authorizations provide new tools to combat COVID-19 at a crucial time, and it should make antiviral therapy more accessible to people at high risk for progression. Now, while these are important tools, they're not substitute for vaccination and people for whom vaccination is recommended, and I continue to urge the public to get vaccinated if eligible. And fourth, we continue our mission of protecting the public from fraudulent medical products. Since March, we've refused admission of more than 23,000 lines of FDA-regulated products that we're trying to get into the country illegally. And finally, I want to assure the public that FDA is committed to continue to use every tool in our toolbox to fight this pandemic with the best available diagnostics, life-saving therapeutics, and vaccines. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you. Assistant Secretary O'Connell.
Chair Murray, Ranking Member Burr, and distinguished members of the committee. It is an honor to testify before you today on efforts within ASPR to respond to the pandemic since the emergence of the Omicron variant. When Omicron first emerged, as we have done with each new variant, we immediately evaluated its impact on our current vaccines, therapeutics, and diagnostics, and adjusted our response accordingly. Data suggests that our current vaccine doses with a boost confer protection against Omicron. As a result, we have continued distributing the 3 authorized and approved vaccines. Over 600 million doses of vaccine have been developed and delivered since the start of the pandemic. We have ample supply of both primary and booster doses, contributing to more than 200 million Americans now being fully vaccinated. However, we have had to make adjustments to our therapeutics supply in light of Omicron. 2 of our workhorse monoclonal therapies, one from Lilly, the other from Regeneron, are not as effective against Omicron. As a result, we have increased our supply of GSK's monoclonal, which is effective. We continue to purchase all that we can from GSK, though this supply is still limited. We are on track to have 250,000 courses available this month. A 4th monoclonal by AstraZeneca is targeted for immunocompromised individuals at high risk and is taken prior to exposure to prevent infection. It has retained effectiveness against Omicron, and we will have made nearly 500,000 courses available through the end of this month. All 4 monoclonals are currently available for states and jurisdictions to order free of charge on a weekly basis to treat either Omicron or Delta infections. Also, we now have antivirals by Pfizer and Merck that are effective against Omicron and are being delivered to states free of charge every other week. We have procured 3.1 million courses
Very nice.
of Merck that are now available. Last week, we doubled our commitment to order 20 million courses of Pfizer's product. We have 265,000 courses available through this month and anticipate delivering the first 10 million courses to states by midsummer. We remain in frequent communication with states and territorial health officials on the distribution of therapeutic products and continue to focus on ensuring these life-saving therapies are available to Americans across the country.
And I'm watching the
dramatic
Jerome
rise
Powell
in
joint
cases
too.
due to Omicron has put a significant strain on our testing capacity. Despite significant effort and investment, there's more work to do, and we are working every day and night with manufacturers to increase the availability of tests. As soon as we saw the dramatic increase in cases in South Africa and Europe, we reached out to test manufacturers to understand their surge capacity and supply chain constraints. We are engaging daily with the lab test providers to mitigate any supply chain constraints with their sub-tier suppliers. We are also working with the commercial and public health labs to prioritize their needs. We continue to use the Defense Production Act's authorities when needed. To further increase test availability, we are procuring 500 million rapid tests to distribute to American households. As a requirement in this procurement, none of these tests can interfere with what is available in the current commercial market, so as not to diminish what consumers are able to access now. We are currently shipping 2.8 million tests to long-term care facilities per week, as we have throughout the pandemic. We continue to work to send 50 million rapid tests to federally qualified health centers and food banks, with 7 million having shipped so far. And we will keep working around the clock with manufacturers and our government partners to increase and sustain the number of tests available now and in the future. And finally, in addition to vaccines, therapeutics, and testing, ASPR continues to provide on-the-ground support to states and communities in need. Since July, 40 National Disaster Medical System teams, nearly 880 team members, have deployed to 19 separate states and the Commonwealth of the
Worst
Northern
part about
Mariana
this
Islands
shit is they
to support
fucking
a
talk
range
too
of
damn much
functions,
during their
including
opening
hospital
statements.
augmentation and decompression, setting up medical overflow centers for patients, and mortuary support. We continue to send supplies as requested from the Strategic National Stockpile, including 300 ventilators to 6 jurisdictions since the emergence of Omicron. We are grateful for the support from this committee and Congress, and I look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you to all of our witnesses. We will now begin a round of 5-minute questions of our witnesses, and I again ask my colleagues to keep track of your clock and stay within those 5 minutes.
Shut up,
As
bitch.
the Omicron variant of COVID-19 continues to spread at an alarming rate, people are looking for clear, straightforward guidance on how to protect themselves and those around
And the
them.
bitch still wearing her mask
It's
though.
really critical that we reduce the infection rates so we can relieve pressure on our healthcare workers, protect people with disabilities and older Americans, young kids, and anyone else who's been disproportionately impacted by COVID-19. However, I have heard from so many people who find the latest CDC isolation and quarantine guidance confusing and hard to interpret. So Dr. Walensky, can you please clearly explain CDC's latest guidance on what people need to do to protect themselves and others if they are exposed to or contract COVID-19? And let me start with vaccinated people. What is your guidance to them?
Thank you, Chair Murray, for the opportunity to clarify. Maybe if I could just rewind the clock to just before the holidays, where we were hearing from hospitals that their staff were going out and that they were in a real crunch in terms of beds. They had plenty of beds, but they didn't have staff to staff them. ICU beds were starting to close. So immediately we worked towards our updated healthcare worker guidance. But when we did so, we recognized that we were going to have challenges and that this Omicron surge that we were about to face was threatening many other places of our healthcare sector.
I appreciate the background, but I just want to know, straightforward,
Whoa!
exposed to or has COVID-19 and they're
Somebody get feisty.
If they are exposed to COVID-19 and they are completely boosted, they do not need to stay home, but they can get a test on day 5. If they have COVID, our guidance does not distinguish between your vaccination status. And our science has demonstrated that you're maximally infectious.
But the
2
bitch
days
wearing a
before
double mask,
and
yo.
2 to 3 days after. So by 5 days after your symptoms, if you're feeling better, if your fever is better, if your cough and sore throat are better, then on day 6, you can go out, but you have to wear a mask. You have to wear a mask reliably, and you should not go to places you can't wear a
You
mask.
suck my
without
dick.
being
How about
told
that? I ain't
to
wearing no
get
mask.
on an airplane.
For vaccinated, what about unvaccinated?
Same for unvaccinated for isolation. So isolation being those who have had disease, who have disease.
Well, let me just say, nearly 2 years ago, when this committee first started having congressional hearings on COVID-19, the very first thing I asked was, where are the tests? And we've made progress since then, and we're now producing 300 million rapid at-home tests each month, along with ramping up our lab-based testing. But I am disappointed, as I said, by the testing challenges that we're facing. tests are hard to find. They're costly. People are unable to find the at-home tests in pharmacies, online. They're waiting in long lines, and often after that, waiting days for results. So it's, ineffective at the end of the day. So, Ms. O'Connell,
Get
I
you
wanna
ineffective.
ask
How
you,
about that?
What are you doing to address the frustrations and challenges we are hearing about COVID testing?
Chair Murray, thank you so much for this very important question. Testing remains a critical priority for this administration. When we saw the unprecedented cases of Omicron sweep into South Africa and Europe, we immediately reached out to our manufacturers to understand any supply constraints they had and to evaluate their surge capacity. We have also met daily with them to make sure that they have what they need from their suppliers, and have used the Defense Production Act authorities 12 times throughout this pandemic in support of testing needs. Most recently, in the last few weeks, for 2 tests, we were able to unlock supplies and manufacturing capacity. We continue to invest in rapid...
Yeah, Wada, I'm watching that too on the other thing.
Demand. And in the fall, we invested $3 billion.
We can do that. You want to watch that? Fuck it. We'll watch that for now. Jerome Powell is fucking puta. Put that bitch on mute. See this.
Particularly hard at the beginning of the pandemic and during the most recent surge, while the Midwest was
There you go.
strongly affected in
There we go.
2020 and the South at the end of last summer. How closely does the Fed look at differences in regional performance when making policy decisions?
We have to focus on the national level, but of course we follow.
Fucking printing press fucker over
In this
there.
instance, the earlier Delta, for example, kind of COVID rolled around the country on a regional basis. That's not so much the case with Omicron. It's so contagious, and it's not the same everywhere, but it really is going through the whole country at a pretty rapid rate. But we follow that very, very carefully.
Appreciate it.
I would say we didn't know much about vaccines and pandemics 2 years ago, but we've all had 2 years to learn. So, but we defer to the experts, though. We don't
2 years to learn, or y'all motherfuckers already knew this shit.
for the experts, but we talk to them all the time.
All right, well, I look forward to following up with you on the diversity question. Thank you.
Senator Crapo is recognized from Idaho from his office, I believe.
That boy Senator Kennedy.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. And Chair Powell, welcome back to the committee. When you last appeared before the committee, I also asked you about an expected Fed report on digital currencies.
How my connection better than his fuckhead
The
shit?
report were because the Fed wanted to ensure that their analysis was correct and to complete and that a release was expected in the coming weeks. However, that report still has not been released. Do you have an update you can share on the status of the report? And are there problems with sharing this report with Congress and the public and what the Fed may be proposing with respect
Yeah, 'cause they don't want people to know the fucking
centralized
truth.
public digital currency?
So the report really is ready to go. We will drop it, I hate to say it again, in coming weeks, but it really is in a situation where it's ready to go. The fall for us, given changes in monetary policy and other things going on, it was hard we didn't get it quite to where we needed to get it, but it's effectively there now. And I will tell you, it's within weeks we will be publishing it. And by the way, it's more going to be an exercise in asking questions and seeking input from the public rather than taking a lot of positions.
Yeah, they don't want shit from the fucking public.
Take some positions.
I told this bitch that right in
All
the
right,
face.
thank you. Well, as,
Quit fucking printing money.
This couple of weeks projection. As you know, I've been asking you and the other members of the Fed about this for a long time, and I really do believe it's time that the Fed release this report so that we can engage in the further.
Yeah, give me my money. Fucking Robin Hood.
Also, with the
Y'all
rest of
stole
my time, go back
some
to
money
the
from me
issue
last
of
year, bitch.
Inflation. I know you've talked about it a lot with us this morning. In response to my questioning about inflation last November, you confirmed that inflationary pressures would certainly last through the middle of this year, of this coming year.
Yo,
What do you now expect with
these niggas in Congress and they fucking Wi-Fi trash.
What do you now expect inflationary pressures to look like throughout this year?
I I wouldn't say things have changed much on that front since last November. I think that inflationary pressures do seem to be on track to last well into the middle of next year.
Why you fucking lying?
And if they last longer than that, then I'll just say that our policy will continue to adapt. Our policy has been adapting to this, for some months. But if inflation is going to last longer, then that would potentially imply more risk of its persistence and ultimately becoming entrenched.
Ah, shit, look at that. I'm over here talking shit, and this shit did it to me. You fucking bastard.
Is this the biggest roofing innovation in over 100 years?
I'm over here talking
A
shit.
roofing product so
With regard to
All right,
the
we're back.
question of what's going to happen over the next 3 to 4 months, as we try to deal with the inflationary pressures you've described,
No,
consumer
you
price
should have said
inflation
you.
would persist over the next
You
3 to
called,
4
not
months at somewhere
found,
between
bitch.
5 and 7%, as we are not seeing. And if the unemployment rate were to remain about where it is now, below 4%, what would you expect the tools that the Fed would need to use would be? And I noted in one of your responses on the inflation issue earlier today, I thought I heard you say that the Fed's overnight interest rate would still, even after you may use it as a tool, would still be very low. Could you just discuss I know you can't predict with specificity what the Fed would do.
Yeah, you
but
can.
Could you discuss what you expect interest rates to look like as you utilize that tool?
Sure. So I think to your point, we're at a place where unemployment is now very low, historically low, and inflation is well above target, and the economy no longer needs this very highly accommodative stance of policy. And I would expect that this year, 2022, will be a year in which we take steps toward normalization. That will involve raising the federal funds rate. That will involve ending asset purchases in March. And perhaps later this year, depending on the run of things, we would also see ourselves beginning to allow the balance sheet to shrink. So I think that's the broad picture of what I see happening. The committee hasn't made any decisions about the timing of any of that, and I think we're going to have to be both humble and a bit nimble here. If you go back and look at where we were a year ago today in the economy, vaccines were arriving. I think that in my thinking there was the idea that'll really help us get past the pandemic, and it has helped a lot, but yet we're at all-time record cases and approaching record hospitalizations nationally. So the thing has stayed with us long.
What does cases have to do with money, bitch?
Open to the changing environment, and monetary policy is going to have to adapt as we learn more. And we're going to learn a lot about the path of inflation, particularly as it relates to these supply-side blockages we've had over the course of the first 6 months of the year and every month. Really.
So do I understand? Are you saying that if the pandemic remains problematic and aggressive, that would impact the timing of any decisions the Fed might make in terms of the federal funds rate?
So I'd say it could, but what's happened is the economy has made all these gains in the face of during 2021, we had 2 major pandemic outbreaks, 2 variant outbreaks, and really the beginning of 21 was dominated by a very strong wave of the original COVID. So, and yet the economy, we made tremendous progress in the labor market in 2021, and growth is at a multi-decade high in 2021. So I expect the economy to continue to be able to deal with these outbreaks.
Let the fucking economy flourish.
It is likely, though, if the experts are right and
Take your
Omicron
fucking
is,
dick out of the fucking gas pedal.
and peak perhaps within a month and then come down after that, I think it's likely you will see lower hiring and perhaps a pause in growth and that kind of thing. But it should be short-lived. It should be, and then the economy, the forecast for the rest of the year.
Motherfuckers say it should be.
Next quarter or two would be a very
Like we ain't been
very positive.
in this bitch for almost 2 years, going on 3.
Would that increase the likelihood of Fed action to increase the federal funds rate, or would it delete that?
if that all happens, I think what we're seeing is an economy that functions right through these waves of COVID, and my colleagues and I see that, and you see that every quarter we write down projections of interest rates. They're individual projections. They're not a committee plan or anything like that. But broadly speaking, all members of the committee see interest rate increases coming this year. The median was 3. But that's going to depend on data. It's going to depend on the progress we see on the supply side, the progress we see on inflation. And we honestly don't know. There's risk on both sides, really, on growth and potentially on inflation as well. So we're going to have to be just very attentive to what's happening in the economy and willing to adapt pretty nimbly our policy as we go through the year.
Thank you, Senator Crapo. Senator Tester from Montana is recognized.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't know if there's any way to turn that mic down, but that was almost painful.
Hell yeah.
It was tough. Not your questions, Crapo, just the intensity. First of all, Chairman Powell, I want to thank you for your willingness to serve. I appreciate your work you've done working with the Federal Reserve Board throughout the health and economic.
Yeah, all these motherfuckers just suck their dick at the beginning.
Just to say
everything you've done.
I appreciate your steady hand. In your opening statement, you
fucking suck his dick more.
Change and cyber attacks, taking those into account as part of the things the Fed has to do. There was an interesting story in the today that talked about
nonchalantly.
$5 billion.
Only we can fucking pay attention to that, Waldo. Everybody else that's watching his ass don't even fucking read between the lines. That's why they ask him questions.
I think that's a conservative number because I don't think it took in the impact
Between the question to get the information
crops and crop insurance and things
for themselves.
I say that because I hope you will continue to gather as much information as possible about what needs to happen as this climate situation appears to be getting worse and not better as time moves on. The American taxpayer deserves that.
The fact that they keep talking about climate change, like you can change God's
that we've had,
system of fucking weather.
This pandemic, it's fair to say that the Federal Reserve has helped us get through this.
Ooh, government's here to fucking change climate change. Yeah, like you can be fucking God for a day.
But I'm going to ask it again in a different way. Could you compare the economy pre-pandemic, pandemic a year ago, and today, and tell me where we're at in relation to those 3 different points in time?
Sure. So the pre-pandemic economy, that was a very long, historically long, 10 years and 8 months expansion. Growth was just modestly above potential every year. So we were getting growth between 2 and 3%, and we think potential growth is around 2%. So that implies a tightening labor market. So we had this long, relatively uninterrupted period of growth, and what happened is unemployment kept coming down and participation kept coming up. And that was very beneficial. So you saw people around the edges of the labor market getting wages. We saw companies going to prisons and recruiting people who weren't going to get out for a couple of years. I mean, it was it was a great.
That's why the market's going up right now.
That's pre-pandemic. So then the pandemic comes and it upends.
That's why everyone in the market knows his little known bitch ass voice can control it going from green to red just by his fucking remarks.
We're a long way from out of the pandemic potentially. But so what are some of the things that we're seeing that are with us now? One of them is that the recovery in labor force participation overall has been slower than hoped. Actually, prime age labor force participation has moved up a full percentage point almost last year, but overall that was offset significantly by older people retiring, for older people and not older people retiring. So we're seeing some differences. We're going to see people working remotely. There's the wage increases that we're seeing are still very skewed to the lower end of the income spectrum. So there may be something happening there where wages are just going to be higher for people. And We don't know whether any of this will persist. Some of those are some of the things that we're seeing. I know employers who are hiring younger people out of school are finding that they have to have one day to work from home, or they'll go to someplace else where they can get that. So it's a place, it's a market right now where labor is very short.
It's an incentive for the working class, for them to be like, bitch, I'm not working if you're not giving me time off. Fuck this job.
Time here, but could you speak a little bit about the importance of the independent?
This motherfucker look like some old ass, fat ass gunny, or a staff sergeant with that hair.
Kind of pressure that was put on you by President Trump to try to politicize the Fed. And I commend you on keeping it independent. Could you talk about why that's so important?
Sure. So it's essential that we work for all Americans.
No, you don't.
That's what we do, and it's essential that we do that without regard to political considerations like election cycles or particular political parties' views on issues that are outside our mandate. You know, we have to focus on the job Congress has given us, which is maximum employment and price stability, and also the payment system and financial stability and other things. But we've got to do that, and that is what we need to do to justify our continued independence, and we're committed to doing that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Tester. Senator Rounds from South Dakota is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chairman Powell, first of all, let me congratulate you again on being selected to serve a second term as the chair of the Federal Reserve, and I do look forward to supporting your nomination. I want to follow up a little bit with regard to the discussion on inflation.
Suck his dick more.
Consumer price index rose 6.8% in November. There appears to be a consistency along that line. Part of that, you have the opportunity.
Oh shit, we on Rand Paul real quick. All right, Waldo, we on Rand Paul. I want to hear this shit.
Quick and devastating published takedown of 3 prominent epidemiologists from Harvard, Oxford, and Stanford. Apparently there's a lot of fringe epidemiologists at Harvard, Oxford, and Stanford. And you quote in the email that they were from Dr. Collins, and you agree that they are fringe. And immediately there's this takedown effort. A published takedown, though, doesn't exactly conjure up the image of a dispassionate scientist. Instead of engaging them on the merits, you and Dr. Collins sought to smear them as fringe and take them down. And not in journals, in lay press. This is not only antithetical to the scientific method, it's the epitome of cheap politics, and it's reprehensible, Dr. Fauci. Do you really think it's appropriate to use your $420,000 salary to attack scientists that disagree with you?
Here we go.
The email you're referring to was an email of Dr. Collins to me. If you look at the email
that you responded to and hurried up and said, I can do it, we got something in Wired magazine.
No, I think in usual fashion, Senator, you are distorting everything about me.
Did you ever object to Dr. Collins' characterization of them as fringe? Did you write back to Dr. Collins and say, no, they're not fringe, they're esteemed scientists?
Look at him! Look at him!
I did not do that. You responded to him that you would do it. And you immediately got an article in Wired, and you sent it back to him and said, hey, look, I got him. I nailed him in Wired of all scientific
That's
publications.
not what went on. There you go again. You just do the same thing every hearing.
That was your response. And this wasn't the only time. So your desire to take down people...
You're absolutely incorrect. As usual, Senator, you are incorrect almost everything you say.
Well, no, you deny, but the emails tell the truth of this.
No.
This wasn't the only time. Your desire to take down those who disagree with you didn't stop with Harvard, Oxford, and Stanford. You conspired with Peter Daszak, who you communicated with privately, and other members of the scientific community that wrote opinion pieces for Nature. 5 of them signed a paper for Nature, an opinion piece. 17 signed a paper that called it conspiracy theory, the idea that the virus could have originated in the lab. Do you think words like conspiracy theory should be in a scientific paper?
Senator, I never used that word when I was referring to it. You're distorting virtually everything.
Did you communicate with the 5 scientists who wrote the opinion piece in Nature where they were describing, there's no way this could have come from the lab?
That was not me.
Did you talk with any of those scientists privately?
You keep distorting the truth. It is stunning how you do.
Did you talk to any of the scientists privately who wrote the opinion? You did.
You
What
did.
were they telling you privately?
Well, let me explain. You know, you're going back to that original discussion when I brought together
That boy squirming like a rat.
to look at every possibility with an open mind. So not only are you distorting it, you are completely turning it around, as
Were
you
most of the
usually
scientists
do.
that came to you privately, did they come to you privately and say, no way, this came from the lab? Or was their initial impression, Dr. Gary and others that were involved, was their initial impression actually that it looked very suspicious for a virus that came from a lab?
Senator, we are here at a committee to look at a virus now that has killed almost 900,000 people. And the purpose of the committee was to try and get things out, how we can help to get the American public. And you keep coming back to personal attacks on me that have absolutely no relevance to reality.
Do you think anybody has had more influence over our response to this than you have? Do you think it's a great success? Do you think it's a great success what's happened so far? Do you think the lockdowns were good for our kids? Do you think we slowed down the death rate? More people have died now under President Biden than did under President Trump. You are the one responsible. You are the architect. You are the lead architect for the response from the government, and now 800,000 people have died.
Right.
Do you think it's a winning success, what you've advocated for government?
Senator, first of all, if you look at everything that I said, you accuse me of in a monolithic way telling people what they need to do. Everything that I've said has been in support of the CDC guidelines. Wear a mask, get boosted.
And you've advocated to make it coercive
Take
done
a look
through
at
force,
everything
and you've
that I've
advocated that
said.
it be done by mandate.
Right.
You've advocated that your infallible opinion be dictated by law.
Right. So again, Madam Chair, I would like just a couple of minutes because this happens all the time. You personally attack me, and with absolutely not a shred of evidence of anything you say. So I would like to make something clear to the committee. He's doing this for political reasons. What you need to do is, he said in front of this committee.
You think your takedown of three prominent epidemiologists was not political?
You don't want me
That
to
was my
finish because you know what I'm going to say.
That was the question. Were
Senator,
you
we
political
will-
in taking
at this-
down
at
these
this
three
point,
prominent
Senator
epidemiologists?
Paul, if you would please, I'm going to allow Dr. Fauci to respond. We have a number of senators who would like to ask questions, and I would like him to be able to respond.
Woo!
The last time we had a committee, or the time before, he was accusing me of being responsible for the death of 4 to 5 million people, which is really irresponsible. And
No,
I
it's
said,
not.
why is he doing that? There
'Cause
are
it's
two
true.
reasons why that's really bad. The first is it distracts from what we're all trying to do here today, is get our arms
Distract.
around the epidemic and the pandemic that we're dealing with.
Meaning Rand Paul's telling the fucking truth.
Number two, what happens when he gets out and accuses me of things that are completely untrue is that all of a sudden that kindles the crazies out there, and I have threats upon my life, harassment of my family and my children with obscene phone calls because people are lying about me. Now, I guess you could say, well, that's the way it goes. I can take the hit. Well, it makes a difference because, as some of you may know, just about 3 or 4 weeks ago, on December 21st, a person was arrested who was on their way from Sacramento to Washington, D.C., at a speed stop in Iowa. And the police asked him where he was going, and he was going to Washington, D.C. to kill Dr. Fauci.
Fucking hilarious,
and they found in
yo.
his car an AR-15 and multiple magazines.
Oh, here we go.
and
Some gun
ammunition
reform push here.
because he thinks that maybe I'm killing people. So I ask myself, why would Senator want to do this? So go to Rand Paul website, and you see fired a little box that says contribute here. You can do $5, $10, $100. So you are making a catastrophic epidemic for your political gain. So the
You
only
have
thing
politically attacked your colleagues and in a politically reprehensible
The only
way
thing that I
attack their
could think of-
reputations.
Okay,
You won't defend it.
No,
You won't
well,
argue it.
I'm
You'll just
sorry,
simply
but we're
turn
going
around
to
the attack.
continue.
Whoa!
A number of questions from
Just
other
one
senators.
more minute.
Why they keep giving this nigga time?
I really appreciate your response, but we do have a number of questions from senators, and we do have a second round, and I'm being asked to make sure that everybody has their time. So
Go
thank
over
you.
there.
Thank you very much for allowing me, Madam Chair.
We will move to Senator Murphy.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Dr. Fauci, thank you.
Yeah, I want to listen to this nigga. All right, back to the Fed.
Lack of workers as much as anything.
Damn.
And that weighs.
There, that nigga pulled up the website. Fired Dr. Fauci.
Supply chains. A lot of us at the beginning of this pandemic raised concerns about being dependent on sole source, for example, whether it's the base chemicals that go into our pharmaceutical drugs or PPE coming from China. I think some of these changes are going to be permanent. We now at the Congress needs to act to make sure that we don't maintain that dependence, but something I think we're going to need to continue to revisit.
That Clay about to
I
go
want to come to another topic that
flame on his fucking internet real
we
quick.
saw a disproportionate effect on minority communities. We lost 440,000 black-owned businesses. A lot of the delivery mechanisms that we put in place on the Paycheck Protection Program, well-intentioned, but clearly minority-owned businesses didn't do as well. I'm a big believer, and I thank folks on both sides of the aisle. I want to particularly call out my friend Mike Crapo on this. We got a lot of money into the CDFIs and MDIs, but there still remains challenges for these organizations. For example, in light of after the murder of George Floyd,
Rand Paul was trying to send him back to Wuhan.
they were going to put up about $200 billion to help deal with racial wealth gap issues. But we continue to hear that there are a number of entities that might want to, for example, invest in MDI,
Mr. Fidgety.
depository institutions, with no intent of changing control, but they can't make those investments because of potentially triggering that regulation on change of control. I think we're going to need some regulatory review here. I think as well.
Yeah, I want to hear some crypto talk on the Fed, man.
A non-emergency discount window that would be geared towards CDFIs and MDIs, modeled after the seasonal discount windows that already exist on a non-emergency basis. Can you speak to how you and the Fed can work with me and others on this committee to make sure that CDFIs and MDIs that are going to continue to play, I think, an increasingly important role in serving underserved communities don't get blocked by some of these regulatory barriers?
Yeah, so we've talked about this a lot. We're very focused on what we can do to support CDFIs and MDIs. We did see in the recovery from the pandemic, in a number of cases where they were the ones who were there in poor communities delivering credit, and to a great extent. So they were in some cases pretty effective. Nonetheless, so what are we doing? As you know, under ESIP, we've been working with the other banking agencies to make sure that those loans and investments can be made in a way that gives attractive capital treatment.
Fauci pretending to be a victim
There's a
after
range of
funding the
things
virus.
We do want to foster investment in CDFIs and MDIs under the law.
I would just ask that we can continue this offline, but for those entities and private capital that wants to come into these institutions with no intention of trying to take over control, whether we set up a different class of stock or some ability for private capital to flow into these without triggering the change of control requirements that frankly at this point prevents a lot of those investments. So I appreciate what we've worked on so far, but much more to do. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Much more to do.
Thank you, Senator Warner. Senator Tillis is from North Carolina, is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chair Powell, thank you for being here. You mentioned in your opening statement you committed to regular and frequent contact. I can attest to the fact that you have regularly contacted my office, and anytime we've had a request for a conversation, you've been very prompt, so I appreciate you for your responsiveness. I want to talk a little bit about the current extraordinary inflationary pressures and the tools that the Fed has to deal with it. Of course, you could have a benchmark rate increase. We know what that would have as a consequence for raising the price of lending and ultimately affecting the cost of buying a car or buying a house or just making ends meet. Your other option is to reduce the balance sheet, particularly from some of the COVID area bond buying programs. I believe that it was Governor Waller who just last month said that because of the alarming rate of inflation, the Fed should begin shrinking the asset portfolio without delay. And I think this week, the Fed president from Atlanta, Mr. Bostic, said he thinks the Fed should aggressively draw down the balance sheet by at least $100 billion a month. I know you went up from $15 billion to $30 billion, but that's a 3.5-time increase over the current run rate. So,
oh shit, DWAC. Shit up $6 right now.
The Fed to have a faster taper in lieu of a rate increase.
We haven't made any decisions. We had our first discussion of these issues about runoff, and as you mentioned, there are a number of different pieces to talk about. We had that at the December meeting. I expect we'll talk about it again at the January meeting. Again, just no decisions. As we reflected in our minutes, we looked at what the Fed did last time, and I was there as we ended QE and then later started to have the balance sheet shrink, and we thought we looked at that experience and thought that's quite informative, but the economy's in a completely different place than it was when we ended asset purchases the last time. So the period of time between stopping purchases and beginning runoff will be shorter, and also the balance sheet's much bigger, and so it can be, the runoff can be faster. So I would say sooner and faster. That much is clear. Beyond that, we're not at a point of making decisions. At this point, we'll have another discussion, and I think we will be in a position to provide guidance at coming meetings. But and you know, we're mindful that the balance sheet is $9 trillion. It's far above where it needs to be, and
it's at the current drawdown rate, that's about a 24-year trajectory to retire the balance sheet. Is that right?
It would depend on the speed, you assume.
Yeah. What sort of indicators are you looking at that would actually drive you to a faster taper, particularly based on some of the comments of the folks at the Fed?
You know, we're looking at the whole range of things. This balance sheet is much shorter in duration than the one that we had at the end of the global financial crisis. That can play into it. I think we'll.
Yo, Powell got some fucking thick ass ears. Look like a fucking gnome, yo.
3-4 meetings to work these things through. I find that the best ideas sometimes take a while to surface. They did the last time on this issue. So part of the things that we're discussing and doing this year.
Okay, thank you. I should also mention for the support your nomination.
Thank you.
I want to turn to bank mergers. You know, Senate Bill 2155 gave us the opportunity to do some regulatory tailoring for some of the smaller banks, and I think it was largely successful. Appreciate the bipartisan effort to do it. But I still, you know, bank mergers are one of the most highly regulated transactions that you could go through. It involves the federal regulators, including the Fed, the Department of Justice, and a lot of opportunities for outside interest groups and others to voice their opinions. But I'm getting the sense that moving forward, there may be a trend towards making it more difficult for some of the super regionals and other banks to move through the merger process. I tracked one recently that involved a North Carolina banking institution that seemed to take a bit longer than I thought it would have. So can you give me an assurance that there isn't a sort of increasing bias on the part of the federal regulators to make it more difficult for some of these super regional and smaller banks to actually get through a merger and acquisition process? Or am I missing, is this a trend that I should be concerned with? Or do you believe that the financial regulators are still in a position to allow that ecosystem to continue to evolve, which I personally believe is very important for the viability of the U.S. banking system?
So we're still applying the law hasn't changed and our practices haven't changed. We're still working our way through, you know, the applications that we have in front of us.
Okay, and I'll submit a question for the record on the status of the Fed payment system. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Senator Warren from Massachusetts is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So since President Biden took office, we've added more than 6.4 million jobs, the most jobs that have ever been added to the economy in U.S. history. But over the past few months, families have faced higher prices at the grocery store, at the gas pump. Addressing inflation is one of the Federal Reserve's most important jobs, and if we're going to solve this problem, then we need to understand why it's happening. So if we can, let's start with Econ 101. Chair Powell, in markets with lots of competitors, are companies' profit margins generally likely to stay low? That is, in competitive markets, are profit margins likely to stay steady, modestly above the cost of labor, materials, and capital?
I mean, microeconomics would tell you that all other things equal, you'll compete down to your marginal cost.
Good. And in markets with greater concentration and not much competition, are corporations generally able to raise prices and increase profit margins, all else being equal?
So the connection between concentration and market power is not as clean as we might think it might be. In some of the industries that have concentrated, there actually has been, sort of lower cost increases. It's resulted in lower cost to consumers, and I'm thinking there of retail and things like that. So it's not as direct.
Well, but let me ask it the other way then, because we're still kind of doing Econ 101 here. If you're a corporation that has eaten up most of the competition and cornered the market, is it easier for you to raise prices on your customers and maximize your profits because you don't have to worry about losing your business? In other words, you've lost the discipline that the market imposes.
In principle, if you don't have competition and you're a monopolist, yes, you can raise your prices.
Okay, and over the past year, we know that prices have risen because of supply chain problems, unexpected shifts in the demand for goods, and even higher labor costs. But if corporations were simply passing along these costs in highly competitive markets, would the company's profit margins have changed much?
So many things affect that calculation. In principle, you could be right, but
well, it's very much not what we're seeing right now. Today, nearly 2 out of 3 of the biggest publicly traded corporations in the country are reporting fatter profit margins than they reported before the pandemic, which doesn't sound like they're just passing along costs. So let me ask you, does that increase in profit margins combined with greater market concentration to you that some corporations may be passing along increased costs and at the same time charging more on top of that to fatten their profit margins?
that could be right. It could also just be, though, that demand is incredibly strong, and that they're raising prices because they can.
Well, that's the point. They're raising prices because they can. They're not being competed down. Market concentration has allowed giant corporations to hide behind claims of increased cost to fatten their profit margins. So the consumer pays more, both because the corporation faces higher costs and because, as you put it, because the corporation can increase prices. The reason I raise this is that higher prices have many causes, and we can't overlook the role that concentrated corporate power has played in creating the conditions for price gouging. Now, before my time expires, I want to ask you about one other important topic, and that is about climate change. Mr. Chair, when you came before the Banking and Housing Committee last July,
more climate change
you said
shit.
that the transition to a lower carbon economy could, quote, lead to a sudden repricing of assets or entire industries, and that we need to be in a position to deal with all of that. Why is it important for the Fed to assess risks related to climate change in order to fulfill its mandate?
Our role on climate change is a limited one, but it's an important one, and it is to assure that the banking institutions that we regulate understand their risks and can manage them. And it's also to look after financial stability. And with financial stability, the issue really is, can something from climate change arise to the level that would threaten the stability of the entire financial system? So that sounds like more in the nature of what you were reading, something in the nature of transition risk.
Senator Warren they call her Pocahontas.
Change happening, which
That bitch an idiot.
potentially create disruption.
Well, the world is running out of time to deal with the climate crisis, and the Fed has an important role.
Oh, we're running out of time.
I hope the Fed
How the fuck is a human gonna control the climate?
I sent you another letter asking for more information.
More money doesn't fucking help the climate.
Scandal, and I asked for a response by next Monday. Can I receive your assurance that I'll get that response by next Monday?
No, bitch. How about no?
I'll have to look into the status.
Whoa, you said I just print money, bitch.
Update you on where we are.
Okay, I'd like to have a response. Okay, very.
You ain't getting no response.
Thank you, Senator Kennedy of Louisiana is recognized.
Here we go. Start the show. Here we go.
Mr. Chairman, congratulations. I think it's fair to say that you are, and once you're confirmed, will continue to be one of the most powerful people in the world.
Like dead
So I'm
silent.
going to begin today. I have some questions, but first, I have a plea. Above all else, above everything else on your plate, I ask that you please preserve the independence of the Federal Reserve. The last thing that America needs right now is to have the Federal Reserve socialist. It's the last thing the world needs right now.
the sub, Young Marley.
And believe me, the whole world is watching.
Oh yeah, we watching for sure.
Including our enemies.
Yes, sir. China. China.
I get it. Our politics.
Motherfucking China.
I hope you'll remain blissfully ignorant of that.
Circle the word happy.
And I get it. I'm not telling you not to listen to elected officials, public officials.
Okay. Funny? Yes. Okay.
I get it. I mean, I can only speak for the Senate. We have some very smart people in the Senate.
Some dumbasses too.
They have strong opinions and strong personalities. We've got a few senators that, to paraphrase Dave Barry, think they ought to make a Hamilton-style musical about their lives. I get all that.
All right, coming at Nancy Pelosi.
But you've got to remain.
That drunk old hag.
The dollar and political fads come and go, but the dollar doesn't.
Mm-mm.
I hope not. The
China.
dollar underpins the entire world economy. Politicize it at your own risk. Let me shift gears. Question.
Circle the Z.
Professor Keynes, about whom I know you know more than I do, but Professor Keynes has seen a resurgence in the last few decades in his number of followers. And of course, we both know, Professor Keynes said, one way to get out of a recession is to have the government spend money it doesn't have to deficit spend to stimulate the economy.
You print money.
But Professor Keynes said something else that the media doesn't usually quote. He also said, when you get out of the recession, pay the damn money back, didn't he? Didn't he say that?
Yeah, I was gonna add that. What he said was it's okay to do deficit spending, but you should be doing surplus, in good times to sort of.
Now, behind me is a chart
Amazing.
of our public debt going all the way back to, I think, 1990.
Write the letter that makes the beginning sound.
You don't have to be Euclid to see that the direction is up. And it's been up under Republican administrations, and it's been up under Democratic administrations. It's been up under Democratic and Republican Senates and houses. It's up.
Duh, it's up.
So here's my question to you. At
At
what point, how much is too much? At what point in your judgment are we gonna hit the point where you have to say, no, that's it? We can't do any more. It's hurting the world, it's hurting our country.
We don't know when that is, and as the world's reserve currency, demand for our paper is very strong. If you had shown that and then asked somebody 15 years ago to predict what interest rates would be, they wouldn't be predicting that the 10-year would be at 175.
No.
Right, so there've been a lot of demand.
But they would have predicted that the debt was gonna go up.
They would have looked at that picture and said, well, you must be experiencing difficulty borrowing, but we're not at all. So, no, we're on an unsustainable path.
Bullshit.
An unsustainable level, but the path.
Bullshit.
It's growing faster than the economy.
Told you the truth and then covered it up with a lie.
Address that over time. We will address it over time. And the better way to do it is soon and to do it in good times. Start when the economy is strong and the taxes are rolling in. That's since we don't do fiscal policy, but I will say that the sustainability of the debt is something we need to get back to and focus on again.
Good luck, Mr. Chairman.
Thanks.
Senator Van Hollen of Maryland is recognized.
He said
Thank
good
you,
luck.
Mr. Chairman. Well, Mr. Chairman, we all recognize we've got continuing economic challenges, but I think it's important to look at some critical areas where we're much better off today than the Fed predicted we would be at this time just a little while ago. We've seen a record increase of 6.4 million jobs in our economy.
Bitch, where?
In 2021. And back in December of 2020, when the unemployment rate was 6.7%, the Federal Board of Governors projected that the unemployment rate in December of the year we just came out of would be 5%. Isn't that correct?
Sure, I can't do it from memory, but I'm sure you're right.
Right. Well, as I reviewed your predictions, that was what it was. And in fact, we did much better than that. The unemployment rate for December, the month that we just left, was 3.9%, and the unemployment rate for that fourth quarter of last year was 4.2%, a year ahead of what the Fed had predicted. Is that right?
Yes.
And what happened in between was a lot of us here in the Senate and the House and folks around the country looked at those projections and said, that is not the kind of course we want to be on, and we passed the American Rescue Plan, which helped stabilize the economy and helped result in those much improved employment numbers. Isn't that right? Yes.
Waldo, how far are you from Florence, Arizona?
Inflation, I think all of us recognize that Americans are experiencing price
Well, you're not in
increases
Arizona anyways.
The Federal Reserve has predicted the Cleveland Fed, it projected a 2.6% inflation rate for this year, which matches the Federal Reserve Board's projections. If you look at consumer expectations, not surprisingly, they're running higher than that because of where we've been in the last couple months. But can you explain why you're confident at the Federal Reserve that we can hit that 2.6% target while continuing to push for full employment?
So that is the median of expectations, of individual expectations. We don't have a committee or official Fed forecast. And it's conditioned on a number of assumptions. And the most important assumption here is that we do get significant relief on the supply side, that global supply chains loosen up and we get more semiconductors so that we can start manufacturing cars again. That's essentially that's going to be a big part of getting inflation back down. Part of it will also be our moving from a very highly accommodative policy to a somewhat less accommodative policy, but still accommodative. But a lot of it will come on the supply side. Right?
And on the supply chain issue, I mean, there have been recent reports of progress in a number of supply chain bottlenecks. Can you just speak to your perception of where that stands?
Yeah, so you've always see a few snowflakes, but it doesn't amount to a storm yet. If you look at the Port of Los Angeles, Port of Long Beach, record numbers of ships still at anchor. we did see, and this may be what you saw, that inventories are moving up and delivery times have shortened, and that's a good thing. But on the other hand, you know, Omicron can really, particularly if China sticks to a no COVID policy, Omicron can really disturb the supply chains again, although it could be briefer this time. So I think the picture is, you know, we wouldn't want to say, I wouldn't want to say that it's decisively improving yet, but we're watching it carefully.
Yeah, I'm sure you're watching these nuts too.
I was pleased to hear President Obama say when he renominated you for this position that making that you
Print more money.
Saw the economic risks of climate change as
That's
a
what they're
quote,
saying.
top priority. Is that an accurate statement?
No.
Yes. And if confirmed, how do you plan to prioritize addressing the financial risks of climate change in your next term?
Making that shit go
We have a
burr.
role to play. It's a narrow one, but an important one, and that is it relates to our existing mandates. We don't have a new mandate on climate change. It is really the simple mandate, the central mandate of
Bash, turn it down.
supervising and regulating financial
Go
institutions
get your brother's
to make sure
headphones.
that they're aware of and able to manage all of their risks. And we're doing that particularly focusing on the largest financial institutions who, by the way, are spending a lot of time themselves on these issues. And secondly, looking at financial stability issues. You know, we have responsibility for the stability of the financial system, and over time, climate risk can play into that as well.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm pleased to see that you do agree that it's a top priority. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Van Hollen. Senator Haggerty from Tennessee is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ranking Member Toomey, I appreciate your holding this hearing. And I want to congratulate Chairman Powell on being renominated to be the chair of the Fed. Thank you for your testimony and your presence here today, Chairman. First, I have just a quick housekeeping question for you. I think I know the answer to this, but as a matter of fact, have you ever embellished your resume, your record, your publication history?
I don't think so.
I did not think so. Thank you for clarifying that for us. I'd like to turn to the topic of quantitative easing for just a minute, Chairman Powell. When Chairman Bernanke first introduced quantitative easing back in 2009, he assured lawmakers at that point that it would be both temporary and rare. Essentially, it was introduced as an emergency measure. Do you agree that that quantitative easing should be both temporary and rare?
I agree we shouldn't use it unless we need to, but I will say it's going to depend to some extent on where interest rates are. We've been in a very low interest rate environment even during good times all over the world, and when that's the case, we don't have a lot of ammunition to support the economy. So I can imagine a regular garden variety downturn, which we haven't had in a long time, in which we didn't need to resort to quantitative easing to asset purchases, and we then wouldn't. But in a world where you've only got a couple hundred basis points to cut, you may need to do that, because what that gives you is the ability to move longer run rates down, not just at the short end.
I understand, but I just remain concerned because here we are 12 years later from its first introduction. The Fed's balance sheet's nearly at $9 trillion. We're continuing to grow it, albeit at a slower pace. So it remains a real concern. You said earlier to Senator Shelby that you think the Fed could begin the process of normalizing its balance sheet later this year. Can you provide us with a little bit more clarity on this process, how soon you think this would begin, and whether you'd consider actively selling securities rather than just letting them gradually run off the balance sheet?
So this is we had our first discussion of this set of issues at the December FOMC meeting. We'll talk about it again at the January meeting in a couple of weeks. Haven't made any decisions. This time is going to bear some similarity to what we did last time, but it's going to be different too, and that's already clear in that we will have the ability to move sooner and to move a little faster than we did last time. So more clarity is coming, soon on that, but I don't want to get ahead of the committee. In terms of selling assets, we haven't made any decisions on that. We didn't do that last time. We never ruled it out either. Mm-hmm. So it's just something we'll be looking at. The balance sheet's a whole lot bigger this time, and also the duration is shorter. So it's a different, and the economy is much stronger. Yeah. So it's a very different situation.
So I'd like to come to a question of governance, if I might. While you've been nominated to remain chairman of the Fed, the Biden administration's 3 proposed appointees would, together with the nominee for vice chairman, who we will hear from this Thursday, constitute a majority of the Federal Reserve Board. I'm looking recently at the 5-member board at the FDIC and what happened
That's how you
there.
push the information out. How
There
it
at the
says other
FDIC,
people
the
supposed to
5-member
see and
board
show.
overturned 88 years.
Look on my
of
YouTube, see if it
and
comes up
independence,
good on your phone.
with Biden political appointees led by CFPB Director Rohit Chopra forcing out
You give no fucks.
chairman before her 5-year term was up, strictly for partisan reasons. This incident causes me to worry that an activist bloc at the Federal Reserve Board could sideline you.
Who's
They
asking
could exert
questions?
their authority while excluding the full FOMC membership. So my question for you, Mr. Chairman, is the Fed vulnerable to similar unfortunate, politically motivated hijacking of an organization like we just witnessed at the FDIC, and what could this committee do to prevent it?
First, and you'll know that I don't have any comment at all on the recent events at the FDIC.
The resigning of the
Monetary
FDIC
policy is conducted by the Federal Open Market
chairwoman.
Committee, which includes the 12 Reserve Bank presidents, and in total there are as many as 12 voters. So we'll always have a balance of governors and Reserve Bank presidents. Regulatory policy is really the business of the Board of Governors, and there are as many as 7 governors and a majority is 4. We do have a history at the Fed of working collaboratively and coming together and getting consensus on issues, and I would hope that certainly is my intention, that is my nature, and I will work hard to make sure that things stay that way.
And as a member of this committee, I work hard to support you in that, to maintain that posture as well.
Meaning?
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Senator
Calbo.
Cortez Masto from Nevada is recognized from her office.
Calbo Nation.
Chairman Powell, it's good to see you again. Thank you always for taking the time to answer my calls, meet with me, answer my questions. So appreciate it.
Why this bitch mic loud as fuck?
With a question that Senator Tester talked to you about, because I think it's important. We recognize, put this in perspective again. He asked you about comments about what the economy was like pre-pandemic, during the pandemic, and then after. And you actually said something I think was important, that we are still...
Who the fuck calling me?
And even
Sorry.
still in the middle of this pandemic, you said earlier in your opening remarks that the economy is expanding at its fastest pace in many years, and the labor market is strong. Now, in our many conversations, you have always prioritized job growth and higher wages, especially for those who tend to earn lower salaries. And you have consistently said that the best thing any one of us can do to increase employment, raise wages, improve our supply chains, and reduce inflation is to get vaccinated, to wear masks, and follow the medical guidance to prevent the spread of COVID-19. Do you still believe that reducing COVID-19 infections will have the greatest impact on inflation, supply chains, employment participation, and wages?
Your mic trash, bitch.
I do, and I think if you imagine a world in which we no longer have to deal with a pandemic, and that's the answer to your question, we would quickly see the supply side problems alleviate. We'd probably see significantly more labor supply. So these issues are still related to the pandemic. It's proving more difficult than we had hoped to end the pandemic, but I certainly would think that's right.
And let me just add one additional thing that, of course, we all have concerns with the rising prices of so many goods. I see it in my home state when I go grocery shopping or hear it from my own family members and constituents in Nevada. One other area I want to also focus on, though, is housing. A new study from the Federal Home Loan Bank of Atlanta reported that the median American household would need 32% of its income
Tumberville.
mortgage payments
So
on
I just got a
median-priced
simple
home.
question.
The most
Of all
since
of you,
November
and whoever wants to
2008.
answer this,
Fuck that bitch for a second.
if you have a problem and you're coordinating, who do you go to? Who is the head coach of this virus that you have to go to?
Who's the head coach?
Administration, whether it's one of you.
He mad because Alabama lost.
Mommy, look, I'm doing this block game.
The person who's in charge of that is Jeff Zients, who
In the
is
White House?
at the White House. And we meet very, very regularly, the entire medical team as well as others, going over all of the data, going over what the strategies are, going over what the issues are, what the problems are, what we've done right, what we've done wrong. We examine
Done a
it
lot wrong.
literally continually, sir.
Has he done a good job?
No.
You know, I think, given the circumstances that we're in right now, I believe he's done a very good job. I really do. This is an extraordinary virus, the likes of which we have not seen even close to in well over 100 years. It is a very wily virus. It has fooled everybody all the time, from the time it first came in to Delta to now Omicron. Very unpredictable, and we're doing the best we possibly can.
Dr. Walensky, it's been reported by some virologists and scientists that this year around 170 people have died from taking the regular flu vaccine. The Vaccine Advisory Adverse Reporting System reported that the number of people dying after or following the COVID vaccine is actually in the thousands. Now, this is what I'm hearing. I'll give you a chance to refute that or confirm it here. You know, is this true? Are we having that many people die after taking one of these vaccines?
Senator Tuberville, thank you for that question. The Vaccine Adverse Event Reporting System is a mandatory system of any adverse event that happens after being vaccinated.
Given the circumstances.
So if you get hit by a car tragically after getting vaccinated, that gets reported in the Vaccine Adverse Reporting System.
As COVID.
So the vaccines
you die, car accident, COVID.
Protect us against
motorcycle accident, COVID.
Against, Delta, they protect us against COVID. They don't protect us against every other form of mortality out there.
Do we keep numbers of people that died following taking a COVID test from taking this vaccine? Do we have any idea? I'm just asking.
I'm sorry, those who have died after taking a COVID
Died following taking the vaccine. Is there any number count? Do we keep records on that died of just from?
Absolutely, yes. I couldn't give you the absolute number off the top of my head, but our staff could.
Because she doesn't want to tell you the truth.
Those data.
You know, Dr. Fauci, you have any clue on that? 100?
Microphone.
I don't have a number, but I think part of the confusion is that when you do a reporting, if you get vaccinated and you walk out and get hit by a car, that is considered a death. I mean, that's the thing that gets.
That's not what he asked you, bitch.
Happens after the vaccination, even if you die of something completely obviously unrelated, it's considered a death. So if I had metastatic cancer, got vaccinated and died 2 weeks later, that's a death that gets counted.
I understand that. Yeah.
And every one of those is adjudicated.
Yeah, one quick question before we get through here. I'm in rural Alabama, but I get one of these home tests, and I test positive. I have asymptomatic. What do I do? People call up, what do I do? I don't have a doctor around. What do I do?
Thank you. So you're asymptomatic?
Pardon?
You're asymptomatic, no symptoms, feel well?
Yeah.
You stay home for 5 days, and the next 5 days, if you continue to be asymptomatic, you can go out, wear a mask, don't go traveling, don't go to gyms.
This bitch got 2 masks on, though.
What do I do?
Then, well, first you go and call your physician, and in fact, I'd say you call your physician regardless, but call your physician, call your provider. If you're continuing to have symptoms, then you stay home until your symptoms resolve.
No therapeutics.
Well, that's where I would say call your physician and see if you're eligible for therapy.
There you go. Come on.
These people don't
Poke.
have physicians. They've got a drugstore.
Senator, we
Poke.
do need to move on.
Oh, my God. Get with the truth.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Ranking
Throw the
Member.
therapeutics in their face.
Hearing is so very important. I really want to thank all of the witnesses here for testifying today.
Suck a dick. All right, let's go back to this shit.
Continued work. Thank you so much as we.
Is any institution eligible for deposit insurance? The FDIC says, in General Counsel Opinion 88,
Sounded like Bane.
that an entity is a depository institution if it is creating deposit liabilities out of customer assets and is carrying.
Yo, I was streaming the Alabama-Georgia game last night on TikTok, right? I had like 300 viewers. It stayed about like 60, 70, and then somebody donated me $1. I got $1, nigga.
Purpose depository institutions.
I'm rich, bitch.
Treated by the Federal Reserve. We've discussed this. What is your reaction to this?
So, as we discussed, there are novel charters, and the SPDIs are one of them, and we want to be really careful because they're hugely precedential. They're very important from a precedential standpoint. And so we've been looking carefully at this, and I would say there are good arguments for viewing SPDIs as depository institutions for this purpose. And I think we're looking carefully at it. I do think we'll make some progress on this, and we can talk about it more offline. But
offline.
I think you do understand that we start granting these. There'll be a couple hundred of them pretty quickly, and we have to think about
Dollars
the
in
broader
funding.
safety and soundness implications, and it's just hugely precedential. That's really why we've taken our time with it, and we appreciate your bringing it to my attention and to talk about it.
Well, as you know, it's been well over a year. And I've been stonewalled for well over a year. My state has been stonewalled for well over a year. You know, you mentioned in your testimony today that we can begin to see that the post-pandemic economy is likely to be different in some respects. My job is to represent Wyoming's best interests and to ensure the Fed is preparing itself for the post-pandemic economy and to promote responsible innovation, as you mentioned in your statement. You know, I asked your staff for an update on the SPDI charter last week, and I've yet to receive a response. And as we discussed in December, I believed I would receive a response by today. So my disappointment is profound. My frustration is profound. And for now, I'll just leave it at that. But I will say thank you for your dialogue with Senator Kennedy and Senator Hagerty today. I thought those were encouraging dialogues. And once again, Chairman Powell, throw me a lifeline. I yield back.
Thanks, Senator. Senator Smith of Minnesota is recognized.
Thank you, Chair Brown and Ranking Member Toomey, and welcome to the committee again. Chair Powell, it was, as always, it was good to talk with you yesterday, and I want to just say, Mr. Chair, that I think that together, Chair Powell and Lael Brainerd would make a great team at the Fed, and I think you're a strong combination. So, Mr. Chair Powell, I'd like to ask you about where we are with employment and how this relates to the decisions that the Fed is making. Last week, the Bureau of Labor Statistics released job numbers from December, as you know well, and thanks to the American Rescue Plan, and I would also say the hard work and grit and innovation of Americans, the unemployment rate has dropped to just 3.9%, which is really a remarkable and historic recovery from the beginning of the pandemic. I'd note that in my home state of Minnesota, in November, the unemployment rate was even lower. This is really an incredible accomplishment. And you and I have discussed this before, how it is useful to unbundle, though, these aggregate numbers so that we understand a little bit more about what's happening. We understand that it's a more complicated story. For example, amongst black workers, the unemployment rate remains stubbornly high at 7.1%, more than twice what it is for white workers. So, Chair Powell, could you tell us, how should the Fed consider factors like this as you evaluate economic strength and whether the economy has reached full employment? The factors, what I'm referring to is unbundling these aggregate numbers so we understand more deeply what impact where we are with the different sectors of our economy.
Sure. So we do look at a wide range of indicators to determine whether labor market conditions broadly are consistent with maximum employment. It's not a single number like inflation can be. And you mentioned a couple of them. So what we saw at the end of the last very long expansion was that unemployment rates and the gap between white unemployment rates and other unemployment rates were at all-time lows. And this was a very desirable feature and really a feature of having a tight labor market. So that's something that's a little bit of something that tells us whether the labor market is tight. We're not targeting a particular number there, but we're using it to inform our thinking. You mentioned African American unemployment, which is at 7.1. It dropped by 2.9% this year. That's the same decline as for white workers. The other thing I'll say is that there was an increase in December of 5 or 6 tenths among black unemployment. It's a much smaller sample size, and it's pretty volatile, so we would tend to look for a couple of months. It can bounce around more than the overall aggregate. Another key aspect of maximum employment, though, is participation. So we also want to think that participation is at its structural high level, and there isn't a lot of slack in that pocket. And that's been, we saw that at the end of the last cycle. We saw participation holding up in the face of demographic decline. And so that's another thing that we look at carefully.
Yep. Thank you. I agree with that. And I think that we are in Minnesota, as we are all over the country, experiencing a shortage of workers. And I'm glad to see that what we are seeing, in fact, is wages increasing, especially for people who are in lower wage jobs, and that for the first time in a long time, workers, I think, have increased bargaining power, which is a benefit to them. So these are complicated issues. I think it's important that we kind of look beneath some of these aggregate numbers. But I want to touch on another issue before I wrap up here. You and I have talked about my grandmother, Avis Mason, who was born in 1898 and who became the president of a small community bank in Etna Green, Indiana. Her father, who started the bank, was blessed with 3 daughters, which is how she became president. Like so many banks around the country and over the years, her bank was ultimately sold to a larger bank and became part of the story of increased consolidation in the financial sector. And this pattern has repeated itself for decades in Minnesota and all across the country. Over the last 30 years, the number of banks in this country has been more than cut in half. We've seen, I think, the harm that industry consolidation can do broadly, especially in small towns and rural places. I note the comments and the questions of my colleague, Senator Round.
Yo, Waldo.
Work on issues of concentration and
This shit, y'all see that?
Chair Powell, one of the important duties of the Fed is to review bank mergers. Can you tell us
Fire Fauci.
mergers today, and what do you see as the impacts of consolidation?
That nigga mad as hell.
And access to financial services, especially.
What's up, buddy?
We operate under a statute which requires us to consider a number of factors. And those include competition and future prospects, financial and managerial resources, convenience and needs of the communities to be served, CRA performance, BSA, AML compliance, and financial stability. So all of those things go into our, and there's a rich lore of how you apply those things, and generally banks that are applying for permission to do mergers understand that body of work. More broadly, though, as we discussed, if you can look back at the United States banking industry, for 30 years and more, almost 40 years, you've seen a very steady decline in the number of banks. So one of the things that's driving that is just, the loss of rural population. I've seen many, in my earlier years at the Fed, many cases in which you have a county that had lost half of its population over the last 50 years. It's very typical of rural America. And there was only one bank left, and it wanted to merge with another bank in a nearby state. So anyway, it's a trend that's happening because of demographic changes. Also, fixed costs are going up. Regulatory costs are going up, and that's a fixed cost. The need to invest in technology to serve your customers is really a fixed cost now, and that requires a bigger bank. So community banks are part of the fabric of America, and we don't want anything we do to sort of exacerbate the problem of community banks going out of business, but there are strong secular forces that are driving this consolidation apart from, regulation, although that can be part of it.
Thank you. I believe I'm out of town. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Smith. Senator Kramer from North Dakota is recognized.
That should be hilarious. Make that shit into an NFT. Set that bitch right back to fucking Fauci, bitch. $1 million. You can buy it back, bitch.
An hour and a half ago, a very high level point that one of my colleagues made, and I don't remember which one, but he said in congratulating you that President Biden clearly has confidence in your ability to lead our economy through this crisis. And without judging those particular words, I'd ask you flat out, do you lead our economy? Is that your job, is to lead the economy?
I'm
I print money, bitch.
Agency that has specific narrow mandates. I wouldn't want to characterize it one way or the other.
I wouldn't either, quite honestly, but I have great respect for and confidence in our free market economy with a very light regulatory touch. That said, I also want to associate myself with Senator Kennedy's strong word of encouragement to keep the Fed independent. That is why I respect you so much, Chairman Powell. As under the previous president, you maintained independence, and we would certainly hope and expect that you continue that independence under the current administration. I want to, you've touched on this, but I want just a little further clarification because somebody.
Can you push this right on? Can you press this one out so this blue one can knock this red one out? Can you do that for me?
Employment. I thought you did a pretty good job. I want to give you a chance to make it even clearer, and maybe I'll help
Daddy.
the way I form the question. Doesn't price stability naturally lead to a strong economy, which naturally leads to maximum employment? In other words, you talked, I think, in your answer that we focus on whichever one's needs the help the most at a given time. That's my paraphrase of it. Perhaps you could just elaborate a little bit on it.
Sure. So most of the time, monetary policy
What are you supposed to do?
works the same way for
Okay, let me
both.
show you.
Usually inflation is
press
low.
this one out.
When the economy is weak, when unemployment is high.
Then I'm
And so
trying.
you cut interest rates, and that helps unemployment go down and helps inflation move up, back up to 2%.
You have to knock this red one
So
out.
usually that's the case, almost all the time. In rare occasions, though, you have a situation where the two sort of goals are not complementary, and we've had a little bit of that here. I'm not
Press
sure we
this
have it
one.
anymore, but the idea being
See,
that
that's
we
what
were
I'm
far
trying to
from
do.
maximum
Oh,
employment.
okay,
That's no
okay.
longer the case. But inflation
I
is really
got
high. So
That's what I'm trying
I
to
think
do.
the
All right,
situation
hold on.
today is more correctly characterized as we're very rapidly approaching or at maximum employment, and we're far away from our inflation.
No, press it down.
There's no basis to prefer one of the two goals over the other, but our form, our constitutionally adopted document at the Fed, our statement on longer run goals and monetary policy strategy, says when this is the case, we look how far something is from the goal and how long it'll take to get to the goal, and we look at the other goal, and we use our tools. And I think in the current application of that provision would say you need to focus on getting inflation under control, because you're not going to have maximum employment unless you have price stability.
I agree. Thank you. Well said. In fact, with that in mind, what I worry the most about with the Fed, and you and I have discussed this previously, is the mission creep that I think both clouds and frankly complicates that main mission of price stability. If you're having to sit around and you have to hire people that are going to assess climate risk as an example, as though banks themselves aren't already considering that, which, by the way, climate risk in my mind is really regulatory risk. Because climate is a global issue. It's not a domestic issue. It's a domestic issue.
There you go.
Global
Thank
issue.
you.
But what I worry
You're welcome.
is the natural outcome of further regulations in the climate sphere, and that's what we're talking about.
Look at this. Look at this.
Stress test, or cyber stress
The
test,
Queen,
and
Freemason.
other number of tests, but climate in particular. The natural outcome is that we're going to somehow transfer our climate guilt to other countries.
Reptilian.
environmental and labor standards.
Reptile.
The climate, except to have more imports from faraway places that are much larger polluters than ours. So I have to tell you, I'm a little worried. I'm quite worried, actually, mostly worried.
You should be worried.
Fed, should we continue to add these extra things that you have to be focused on? And I would just ask for a response to that, and then my time will wrap up.
Stop printing money.
I agree with your principle, which is that we got to stick to our knitting if we want to remain independent. I really do. And I guess I would say climate is appropriate for us as an issue to the extent it fits within our existing mandates.
Daddy,
And I
that's
think it
another
does.
one. Can you knock this
you know,
red out from this green
in the
one and
sense
this
of
one?
It's another risk over time that banks are going to run. But we're not.
Mommy,
The broader answer to climate change has to come from legislators and the private sector.
I agree. Thank you, and I look forward to supporting your confirmation.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Senator Ossoff is recognized from his office.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Chair Powell, for joining us. Congratulations on
you do it?
renomination. Chair Powell, are you prepared, if necessary, to act with agility flexibility and speed if inflation risk to the upside manifests in coming months and quarters?
Yes.
And what do you assess to be the level of risk that inflation surprises to the upside in this year?
Well, I would say it this way. My expectation is that we will see some relief on the supply side as the year goes on. By that I mean global supply chains will start to loosen up in the psychology of businesses.
Are you supposed to lay down?
People.
No.
I think that increases, and that would indicate that we would respond.
Thank you, Chair Powell. You noted that the Fed and many mainstream economic forecasters had difficulty anticipating the supply chain bottlenecks, the labor shortages, the difficulty with which the global economy would add supply in response to the return of demand and demand stimulated by government policy. How can the Fed improve its modeling such that it's not surprised by those macroeconomic dynamics in a future crisis?
So I think this is a unique situation. We don't have 10 pandemics to look back on and say, oh, these are the common features when the global economy shuts down to deal with a global pandemic. It was all just new, and it wasn't the problem, strictly speaking, isn't the models, it's the assumptions you put in the models, right? So I wouldn't blame the models. Really, it just is that we and other forecasters, we believed, based on our analysis and discussions with people in industry, that the supply side issues would be alleviated more quickly than now appears to be the case, substantially more quickly. We believed that we would have seen material relief on the supply side. We also thought, by the end of last year, we also thought that there would be a much more significant return to the workforce than has turned out to be the case. And while that's not what's causing current inflation, it is more the demand side issue that labor supply can be an issue going forward for inflation, probably more than these supply side issues, these supply chain issues that we're seeing. So we assumed, we believed that we would see these things, and the data have come in pretty consistently showing that that the supply side challenges are more persistent and more substantial than we'd expected.
Thank you, Chair Powell. I want to discuss with you institutional integrity, public confidence in institutions, ethics among those who hold high office and have privileged access to information. I'm an advocate for banning stock trading by members of Congress who make policy, who have access to information and economic forecasting, and banning stock trading by their spouses. And I will be introducing legislation this week intending to make that the law.
Meaning Nancy Pelosi making $30 million.
Those new rules. We had this week the resignation of another. The bitch violates her own rules. Related to controversy about their stock trading. How widespread is the practice of stock trading, management of one's own portfolio at senior levels in the Fed? Do you agree that it undermines public confidence in the institution? Will you work with this committee to advance legislation? I know the chairman has proposed some to end that practice, and will you comply with any lawful requests or commands for records or information by this or other congressional committees to examine those trades and their propriety?
Poppy, I'm doing something.
Well, to the latter, of course.
That's why you got to do it yourself. It's your game. Think.
We have, immediately upon the emergence of these facts, we began to devise a brand new system of governing investment by principals and senior staff associated with the FOMC. That process is very far along. It's nearing completion. We've already announced the contours of it, and it effectively ends any ability to actively trade on the part of any senior Fed official, either FOMC member or senior staff. You can't purchase any equities. If you bring equities to the Fed, ownership of equities to the Fed, of course they can't be in banks or anything like that. but you can sell them. But if you want to sell or buy anything, you have to give 45 days notice, and it's non-discretionary. Once you say you're going to do that, then those securities will be bought or sold in 45 days. So there's no ability to time the market. In addition, we're going to have a group at the Board of Governors here in Washington that's pre-clearing trades, all trades, and is in a position to apply the rules consistently across the system. And I really think this is the strongest system I've seen in place certainly for a government agency. And I think it really does address the current, it rises to the current situation. I completely agree that the public's faith that we are working to their benefit is absolutely critical.
Thank you, Chair Powell. Will you provide the outlines of that proposal to this committee as soon as possible?
We've already announced it, and we're very much at the point of being ready to adopt it, but of course we'd be delighted to share that.
Yeah, looking forward to seeing the details. It is vital that the public understand that those in positions of power are not trading based upon access to information that the general public does not have. Thank you, Chair Powell, for your testimony today. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
The Senator Daines from Montana is recognized.
Chairman, thank you. I want to start by expressing my continued concerns my colleagues have had with inflation in the economy. The last time
for folks to realize that we're still in a very difficult place when it comes to accessibility. Dr. Walensky, this is a question for you, and you and I have had many conversations last year about the specific impact of conditional sale orders as it relates to the cruise industry. That industry was effectively shut down for all of 2020, and we were able to salvage a bit of it as things relaxed last year. But in fairness, the industry itself has undertaken extraordinary precautions as one industry to make sure that people are protected from this virus. So the question to you is, I want to make sure that Alaskan communities and businesses can have a season this coming year. And right now, people are making their decisions as to whether or not to book a trip to Alaska for the summer or not. I understand the conditional sale order is set to expire in a few days in recognition that the companies have practices that adhere to or even exceed the guidance in the order. So I guess I'd like some assurance from you that they can count on that this is clear guidance and messaging to those within the industries and to those who are counting on being able to have a season this coming summer.
Yeah, thank you, Senator. And I think the conditional sale order and the fact that the industry has stepped up and is now interested in doing and exceeding, as you know, the compliance with the sale order without the order even necessarily needing to be in place is a real testimony to how well that has worked and how we've worked collaboratively with the industry. What I can say is that, just over the last 2 weeks with Omicron, we've seen a 30-fold increase in cases on ships during this season because of Omicron. So while I anticipate that with ships following conditional sale order, we still will continue to do the oversight and watch and do all the technical assistance and support in every single way. We anticipate that this order will not be renewed and that the cruise ship industries will continue to understand that this is a really safe practice for those industries. What I can't predict is what the summer will bring.
Understand that, but for right now, you expect this guidance to stay in place.
That's my anticipation.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you. Senator Hickenlooper.
Now it's on. Thank you, Madam Chair, Ranking Member Chair. First, I want to reiterate a little bit about what Senator Romney said. I was the odd one out. I worked as a scientist for a number of years, and then I was a mayor of a big city and was pretty much the only scientist among all the mayors. Then I was a governor and pretty much the only scientist among governors. And now I'm one of the only scientists among senators. And I recognize from that long list of experience the frustration that you must feel having to put up with the attacks and assaults when you're out there trying to do your job, and something that each of you have committed to is the service of society. Anyway, I just want you to know that I appreciate how difficult science is. It's not perfect, and when you combine that with the complexity of dealing with any large bureaucracy, I'm not making apologies. These are just like, just like any, well, we're having a war against this virus, and just like in any wartime situation, mistakes have serious consequences. But I appreciate more than I can say how much work you all have done, and I don't think anyone here thinks you're not trying your very best all the time. Really appreciate that. Dr. Fauci, I think one of the problems we haven't gotten far enough on is innovation, and how do we stimulate innovation to go faster and better? How do we increase not just the breadth of our vaccines, but the durability, so that as we get the next wave, I'm not sure how many letters there are in the Greek alphabet, but I know there's going to be another one. And in that process, because I think this country is known for innovation, it is one of the tools that we have that we know will work. I'm hoping that you can take the opportunity to be a little bit optimistic and feel that you're not going to be judged and held accountable, because I think people want to hear that we are going to come through and begin to look at some of these things successfully.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much, Senator, for your original kind comments, and I'll answer your question now. As you know, as a scientist, that there are fundamental basic issues that are discovery, that once you get the discovery, then you could do the implementation of that discovery. We were very fortunate in that the basic research and clinical research investments that had been made literally for decades prior to the new revelation that we had a very threatening virus among us was the reason why we were able to use new platform technologies as well as image and design to get highly successful and safe vaccines. That same thing is going on right now. It isn't well known because it isn't front page yet. And you know, as a scientist, when you're doing your basic research, it's only until you get the result that people really understand what you've been doing. There's a lot of investment, not only in improving the vaccines that we have for COVID, for SARS-CoV-2, but a lot of work, as I mentioned in my opening statement, about looking at using the tools of fundamental, basic, and applied science to develop next generation of vaccines, particularly universal coronavirus vaccines, or at least universal SARS-CoV-2 vaccines, so we won't be chasing after the next variant, that we'll be able to have a vaccine that has the capability of responding to every iteration of a variant. And there's a lot of work going on with that right now. But again, when you're doing basic research, as you can appreciate as well or more than anyone, that usually isn't very well recognized by the public.
Point made. In terms of testing, and a parallel thought, Dr. Woodcock, maybe you can address this. The testing now is, by the time it gets to the retail, is somewhere in the $15 to $20 range, maybe as high as $22 or $23 in some places. Is there the prospect of, because I keep reading about different approaches to testing, that we might find a way to reduce the cost of testing down to, instead of $15 could be 15 cents, or at least for the chemical side of it. I realize then you've got to manufacture it and put it in cases and, packaging.
All right, back to the Fed.
It is not a contradiction. It is not somehow contrary to the interest of a working family to get price stability. In fact, it's necessary for the well-being of the working families of Pennsylvania and America that we bring about price stability. Mr. Chairman, two quick questions for you. One regarding a central bank digital currency. Some have advocated, as you know, that that a central bank digital dollar be used and developed in such a fashion that individual Americans have retail accounts with the Fed, and the Fed becomes the retail banker for America. It seems to me that there is absolutely nothing in the history, the experience, the expertise, the capabilities of the Fed that lend the Fed to being a retail bank. Is that a fair observation?
I would say it is, yes.
Thank you. A second, I know we're going to get our report soon, and I'm very much looking forward to this, as you and I have discussed. But I wonder if you could respond to this. If Congress were to authorize and the Fed were to pursue a central bank digital dollar, is there anything about that that ought to preclude a well-regulated, privately issued stable coins from coexisting with a central bank digital dollar?
Oh, here we go.
Right. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
That's all he talked about was stable coins?
Recent, you've responded 3 times, I believe, to this issue, but I wanted to try to get a little more specificity
Papi.
from Senator Cortez Masto, Senator Ossoff,
Ask
Senator
Mommy.
Warren.
Oh, no,
The
she's
recent
doing cookies.
revelations about the vice chair's financial transactions before the Fed announced its extraordinary support of the economy in 2020 are pretty troubling, as you and I have talked and you've responded to here. After the initial fallout from Fed officials making stock trades, you announced stricter trading rules at the Fed. That was, I believe, in October. Those rules have still not been written, to my knowledge. We've not seen them, if they have been written, so they certainly obviously haven't been implemented. When will these rules, when will we see them, and when will they be put in place?
Imminently, we've tried to take care and write them correctly. They're complex. We have to hire people. We've got to build systems, and we've got to write rules. So we've been hard at work at that since October. We're ready to move ahead with that, and I would think it's in the very near future.
Okay, we're watching. I have a bill with several of my colleagues, Senator Warnock, Senator Ossoff mentioned it. His bill and our bill complement and do some of the same things. The importance of banning conflicting trading at the Fed. We should move also with our colleagues too. So that's a next step in this. I want to, before closing, address one issue that came up today. You've said banks were well capitalized during the pandemic. They had one of their most profitable years ever. But the largest banks still are spending it on stock buybacks and bigger dividends while still demanding relief for policy measures because of the volume of the deposits they're taking in. Government help can be necessary, but they don't need government help now. They should scale back. They could and should and can scale back their stock buybacks. Banks could use that capital to increase lending to small businesses, mom and pop manufacturers. We've seen manufacturing wages, which used to be the highest wages in our economy particularly for sort of moderate income people. We've seen that slide back in part because mom and pop manufacturers critical to the supply chain are not always getting the access to capital they should. We should use that capital to increase lending, to invest in communities instead of enriching their executives while pushing to weaken resiliency of our banking system. The Fed needs to strengthen, not weaken capital requirements. It's a job of our banking system to support the real economy, not executive stock portfolios. That's what this comes down to. Everything the Fed does needs to support the economy so it works for all Americans, workers, small businesses, their communities. That's the Fed. You must lead. If confirmed, I plan to support your confirmation. I'm counting on this as most of us in the Senate are. So, Chair Powell, thank you for being here today. Thank you for providing testimony. Senators who wish to submit questions for the hearing record, those questions are due at the close of business.
I think he's done.
Natural disaster, and you can fire your board of directors because your factory was devastated by a hurricane, a tornado, or a wildfire, but I don't know whether that would improve the situation. I think right now
Why is this bitch still double masked?
of operations for hospitals and
Are you still there? Yes, bitch. Fuck you doing? This ain't Netflix and chill. What the fuck? C-SPAN and chill. How dare you ask me that?
As a gun owner, you need to know how to protect yourself.
What type of shit is this?
It's equally important to know what happens.
what's actually happening right now, which is most people are going to get COVID. All right, and what we need to do is make sure the hospitals can still function, transportation, other essential services are not disrupted while this happens. I think after that will be a good time to reassess how we're approaching this pandemic.
I'm out of time, but I think if you want to regain the trust of the American public, you probably need to look at a total revamp on what we do in terms of how we contend with it over the next year or so, or I think you're going to get more forceful editorials from places that you would never imagine. If you keep doing the same thing, generating the same results, that isn't the formula for success in any endeavor.
Thank you. Senator Baldwin.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I want to thank all of our witnesses today, and I also want to just underscore the preface that our colleague Senator Romney gave to his questioning. I like the way he described it. Sometimes we come to perform, sometimes we come to be informed. And I guess I would just speculate.
Not a chance. Nobody gives a fuck what the CDC says. Nobody gives a fuck what the FDA says. Nobody gives a fuck what the government says.
There's any number of areas we could go. I reflect on proposals for ultraviolet light and drinking bleach and drinking hydroxychloroquine. We could go there, but it's not constructive.
That's a therapeutic, bitch.
And so I'm going to be constructive in my questions, and I just urge my colleagues to do that. We're all in this together. And we have a duty to act responsibly in that fashion. And again, thank you to our witnesses. Dr. Walensky, I'm going to start with you on a topic that I bring up frequently when you're in our presence, and that is the tools we have now to sequence, do genomic sequences, to better understand variants, to better track variants. I know that there's been much investment in that. I'd like to hear what tools that we have in place now that we didn't before, and what you see the future of this genomic sequencing is, especially as this committee looks at pandemic preparation for future potential pandemics.
Thank you, Senator Baldwin, and for your championing our ability to ramp up our genomic sequencing efforts, and the resources from the American Rescue Plan, once that $0.7 billion really did allow us to detect Omicron's.
I just want to see what this shit says.
I can't pull it up.
So that any sequence that had this footprint, I shouldn't say any, many sequences that had this footprint, we were specifically looking for this Omicron variant. Within days, we found it. So within 3 days, I think, that we started doing this enhanced surveillance, and then within days, we had 10s, 40s. By about 4 days later, by December 5th, is when we started detecting it in our background genomic sequencing. So that background genomic sequencing now does tens of thousands of sequences a week. It's a collaboration with academic partners, industry, commercial labs, CDC labs, public health partners to do tens of thousands of sequences a week. And what we do is we look at the number of cases that are out there, and our goal is to detect a variant that is present at 0.1% with 99% confidence, so that we see the menu of variants that are out there. We are enthusiastic about this program. We are intending to ramp up this program for potentially other viruses, the potential to do so there, for other foodborne outbreaks, as well as for wastewater investigation. We have the capacity to do that there as well. So again, thank you for championing this effort, which truly did allow us to detect Omicron in real record speed. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, Assistant Secretary O'Connell, when we last met at this committee, I asked you for a commitment that a significant portion of the $10 billion for the Defense Production Act funding that I helped secure as part of the American Rescue Plan be invested in the raw materials needed to make N95 masks here in America. The alarming spread of Omicron has made the need for N95s even more clear. And yet, ASPR has not spent any of this American Rescue Plan funding on the raw material needed to make N95s in America, while it has invested $3.1 billion on other priorities, primarily using prior supplemental funding. The FDA reports now that 60% of the KN95 masks that are being imported from China are fake, and Americans still can't go to a local pharmacy and purchase an American-made N95. So President Biden has now personally urged Americans to upgrade the quality of the masks they wear. I want to know when the American people will be able to buy an American-made N95 mask that they know will protect them, and when we can expect ASPR to invest the American Rescue Plan funding into the raw materials necessary.
Senator Baldwin, thank you for that question. You can buy an N95 mask manufactured in America now. We have 737 million of those in the Strategic National Stockpile. We are also in the process this month, we hope, to award, or next month, as contracts go, to award an agreement for warm base manufacturing of N95 masks. What we're asking the vendors to return to us as part of the proposal is their ability to manufacture 141 million masks a month at a surge capacity, and to be able to maintain that manufacturing at a 20 to 30% rate in times where demand is not as high. So we are very invested in N95 masks being made available, and we'll continue to look, and I appreciate your support in getting us the American Rescue Plan dollars that we're currently investing, and we'll continue to look at the right ways to invest that, and have really appreciated the conversations you and I have had around that.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the witnesses have been here well over 2.5 hours. We are going to have a second round of questions. So I'm going to recess for 10 minutes to allow a break for our witnesses. We will reconvene at 12:45.
12:45.
All right. Go get Tris for the bathtub. I'm gonna go get Nick and get her.
Be back in 12:45. I'll go back live. Waldo, I'll meet you right back here. I'm going to end this bitch and change the name so I get more viewers. They all work for Pfizer. Rachel Maddow gets paid $30,000 by Pfizer every day to push propaganda. I mean, that's a fat ass check, yo. If you was getting paid $30,000 per day to push propaganda, that bitch got to be rich than a motherfucker for the last 2 years, yo. We'll reconvene in 15 minutes.